Now it's time for the sponsor perspective portion of our program. Before we get going, it's a quick clarification. While I'm conducting the interview and these questions are really mine, content of this portion shouldn't be considered classically editorial. With that, I'm pleased to welcome my friend Brian Hendricks, Vice President of Policy and Government Relations at Nokia Americas. Brian, you heard me. I was just talking about you, as well as the governor of Missouri, talking about teachers. And as we look at this sandbox, excuse the pun, of getting digital connectivity right in this country, and also with particular focus on educating children, connecting schools and kids wherever they may be. I'd like to know from you what you think our biggest blind spots in this conversation are that we've got to confront.
Well, first, thanks for having me back, Steve, and congratulations on another incredible forum and event. Happy to follow my friend, Chairwoman Rosen Worcel. She and I have been confronting these issues way back to our time in the Senate. There are blind spots, and I think she noted a couple actually for you there about sizing the homework gap. But it isn't just a homework gap, it's a coverage gap generally. We still have very poor information about where the networks are actually available, where they're not yet available. There's already been an effort to improve the quality and accuracy of broadband mapping. That'll help. In the interim, the school districts, as an example, which is a big focus for your topic here today, do have a lot of very good information on the connectivity of their students and their families. So we certainly should and can leverage that information. So we have to know where the networks are and aren't operative. And then the second thing we still know very little about is what are the drivers of the affordability crisis? Because it isn't just the cost of the services. It's often, as the chairwoman noted, the cost of the devices to fully leverage the services. So we need closer analysis about the affordability issues, the availability issues as well.
One of the other dimensions that I've been fascinated by this time we've been in is, whether a bank shot possibilities. And what I mean by, tell the audience what I mean by bank shots. Sometimes we pursue policy very earnestly. There's a challenge. Let's get our act together. Let's go after it. But, I'm interested in, connectivity in healthcare, for instance, with telehealth, the massive expansion of online medical consultations, whatever. I'm just wondering if that's sort of a bank shot that sometimes, when you see the demand rise for connectivity for health, that can have a potential impact on education. Am I wrong in that, or is that an opportunity, a bank shot opportunity, to help address educational connectivity?
It certainly is an opportunity, and I'll go a step further. As technologists, companies like Nokia, we often make forecasts and projections about how the technology in a particular generation is going to change, what it might enable, what the winning use cases are likely to look like, and we're usually wrong. We usually undersell what's going to happen. One of the, I don't want to say it's an upshot, but one of the positive things that can be taken out of what we've learned from the pandemic is that we were thrust, not a little at a time, but entirely all at one time, into the use of broadband connectivity as our delivery platform for rural healthcare delivery, diagnostic medicine, online learning, et cetera. So it's showing cracks in the system in terms of coverage and capability that might have taken us a very long time to discover if we hadn't. And if we're smart about this, particularly in the area of education, if we invest in cultivating, applications that make online teaching easier for both the student and the teachers, in terms of healthcare, in order to improve the quality of diagnostic medicine, if it has to be done remotely, what are the network needs? Is the throughput and the latency sufficient so that we can actually do this? We can model now a world where we're going to transform and digitalize a lot of our activities of daily life. We assumed that would come from the improvements in our existing technologies, and certainly as a key driver from 5G. We speculated about it, but we're actually seeing in real time what that would look like. And we're seeing some spots that we're not prepared for, and that can be beneficial to us.
Brian, I'm probably going to get in trouble with this question, but years ago I interviewed a Nobel laureate, a fascinating guy named Arno Penzias. He was at Lucent Technologies, but a very famous and a very blunt dude. And he said, when it came to the internet, he was famous for saying the internet was going to make smart people smarter and dumb people dumber. It was going to create this line. But I mean, I'm sort of interested in, when we talk about the digital divide and the jump to 5G, these massive structural seismic shifts in opportunity and connectivity, that if you're in that turbo flow, you're going to have a very different world. And if you're not, it's going to be a radically different, a huge distance. And I'm just wondering, are the stakes of this conversation, understood to be as high as I think they are?
I don't think they're understood to be as high as they really are, quite honestly. And, Nokia is a supporter and a fan of an update to the National Broadband Plan that was put together about 11 years ago. It was done by the National Urban League. It's called the Latimer Report. It should be required reading for pretty much every elected policymaker. We certainly support its findings, but I think one of the things that it's done that maybe past efforts hadn't, that focused just on availability of the physical network and the affordability of the services or the devices. And it goes on to talk about, well, what will be delivered and where are the opportunities and what's the impact on equity and inclusion agendas if we're right about the transformation of society and you don't have a connection. It used to be inconvenient and it used to be frustrating to not have a broadband connection in 2018 and 2019. But for your needs, you could go to a library or a school where we had done a pretty decent job of wiring things. But as we're seeing in the pandemic now, occasional access to broadband is no longer a luxury. It's a requirement of daily life. And we're not going to be able to do that simply by wiring anchor institutions. We're going to need individual connections because the flow of content, the flow of services, access to digital skills training, education, content, enrichment materials for students, these things are going to require a broadband connection. So that not only if we get this wrong, when we roll out this next generation of technology, not only will we make permanent the digital divide, we will turn it into a chasm, and it'll be fairly catastrophic for any serious hope for equity and inclusion.
Brian, I want to ask you, you and I haven't talked about this, but in the arena of deploying 5G and this next generation, the strategic leap in communications, data, sensors, you know, all the stuff that you need to bring in to the environments that we're going to have, particularly in urban areas, but also non-urban areas. What should we in communities and state government, I'm going to be talking to Governor of Missouri in a minute, what do we need to understand that we don't get about this new infrastructure that's coming, about the stakes of it? Because I already know, talking to other players in the 5G space, that the rollout is complicated, right? The level of infrastructure, you know, retrofitting is complicated. So I'd just love to hear from your perspective, the Brian Hendricks, you can take Nokia hat off if you want, but what do we need to do to get this transition right and healthy, make it inclusive, make it, you know, the kind of jump forward we all want?
Well, certainly it's going to require a lot more cooperation and collaboration and less combativeness. You know, we have had a lengthy set of proceedings about siting issues and states and localities and the need to expedite those processes to make it easier. I think industry needs to frankly do more to find ways to cooperate and collaborate with cities instead of, you know, arguing and looking for preemption and things of that nature, because this isn't a one-time rollout. This is going to be an evolving situation. We're going to need access to more and more types of infrastructure. I think the second thing that we have to focus on is we anticipate there'll be a massive infrastructure bill or debate in Congress this spring. You know, past efforts at infrastructure have focused on things like roads and bridges and shovel-ready jobs, which is great, but they haven't always included the forward-thinking what I call smart policies, things like dig once to make sure as you lay highway, you're putting conduits so you can pull fiber through without having to tear up a highway. If you're going to build new bridges, if you're going to build new rail infrastructure, you know, putting sensors in place and putting attachment points for micro infrastructure. So plan for a continued evolution and need for siting as these things go. And then I think, you know, Chairwoman Rosenworcel has had her finger on a number of problems. She's been very forward thinking about the need to simply reform a lot of the programs that we have at the state and federal level, which are artifacts of prior generations of technology deployment. Not all partnerships, not all products not all technologies are eligible for support of some of these programs. And it really does need to be an all hands-on exercise. We shouldn't be picking technologies. We should set what the requirements and the needs are aspirationally, and we should invite all participants, all providers, all products to the table. And then we need to modify and reimagine how we support those things to encourage, lower cost, more efficient deployments that are more sustainable. And I would say the other thing, there's great opportunity with 5G in particular. Part of the transformation that I'm talking about is building a more sustainable society. The technologies and the decision to use sensor capabilities and precision farming, intelligent manufacturing, smart logistics, smart sewer and municipal infrastructure, they're not always the sexiest issues. When you think about the savings to cities and states in terms of not having to roll guys with a truck to bang on a pipe with a wrench to find out where the problem is because you've got smart infrastructure, there are ways that we can be much more efficient in moving people and water and resources around, which, the sustainability agenda is a big one too, that we should be paying a lot of attention to. So those are just some of the pieces, but we have to reimagine and not show fealty to all of our processes and policies of the past. We have to update them for the needs of today.
Well, I know we've got the governor online, Brian, but I want to squeeze in one quick question to you. I know that you think we need to connect every home in America. We need to connect. We showed that just connecting libraries and schools and McDonald's isn't enough. We need to go over. What's the price tag for that? What do we need to actually think about in terms of getting that element right? What's the price tag the country needs to consider?
Well, it's very hard to put that in perspective. Let's just assume for a moment we don't make the changes that I'm talking about. We keep the existing programs that we have, which we think overly constrain the solution set, so that we could talk, if we had more time, about some of the private networks we're launching right now for school districts to connect their students. None of those projects are eligible for federal funding right now because we're not eligible telecommunications carriers. So if you don't make all technologies and all products eligible for the programs, then what you're locking into is a smaller subset of possibilities. And those are often going to be the really expensive ones. A fiber to every home is going to be very expensive to do. And it may not be necessary to deliver the kinds of capabilities that we're talking about. It may make a lot of sense in certain places and you can get a lot of yield from it, but it may not make sense in other places. And we have to make sure that we reimagine things. And we've also seen that we've spent something close to $80 billion, I think the figure is, between the last 5 and 7 years. And we haven't gotten the greatest yield, Steve, off of the connectivity. And we're seeing that you still have 30, 40 million people unconnected. So if we don't change things, is it outlandish to say we will need more than $100 billion to finish the job? No, that's not outlandish at all.
Wow.
But if we make some of these smart changes, we can bring that cost down and make the resources go farther.
Brian, do you do a lot of business in Missouri?
Oh, I'm sure we do. I don't have the exact figures. I know we're talking to some of the schools in Missouri, some of the larger districts and some of the more rural ones about the possibility of doing some of these private network solutions to connect the students.
Well, good.
And
well,
families.
We're going to jump from you to the governor of Missouri. You're going to consider yourselves introduced. But Brian Hendricks, Vice President of Policy and Government at Nokia Americas, I really appreciate. Every time we have a conversation, I learn a ton, and so I'm really grateful for your support of the conversations. But I'm more thankful for having a kind of high-octane discussion on these important issues. Thanks, as always, for joining us.
All right. Thanks again, and congratulations, Steve.